what am I? Who am I? Who's Mrs. Kasha Davis without the alcohol? And then I began to realize I'm so much more. I can go on stage and I can remember what I'm doing. I can go on stage, and if I make a mistake, which we all do all the time, doing everything, I don't have to beat myself up if I missed a line or missed a lyric or didn't know the next performer's name, or, I was telling my life story prior to getting sober, and I was forgetting my life story. How is that happening?
I am so excited to welcome Ed Popil, also known as Mrs. Kasha Davis. Ed, thank you so much for joining us here on Sober Stories.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here. This is wonderful.
Beautiful. Well, we always kind of start off the podcast with just kind of an introduction of who you are, what you do. Obviously, we have an idea of what you do, but who you do life with, any of the high notes for our audience who is not familiar with you.
Sure. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Ed Popil, and I am 51 years old. I am approaching, God willing, one day at a time, 7 years sober on July 13th
Amazing.
This summer. Thank you. And it's just been an absolute rebirth and re-journey and refocus and reclarification of life on every aspect. And I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I moved to Rochester after a divorce from my ex-wife at the time, came out, found a new life, and ended up finding the man of my dreams. And we have I have two wonderful stepchildren who are now early 30s, late 20s. One's getting married.
Oh my goodness.
And I work as a drag queen full time. I worked in a career for 18 years working for Dial America, a call center. And I was the center manager, and I had a wonderful career there. It was killing me. It was time for me to follow my heart and follow my gut and do what I love, which is to perform. So that's what I'm doing now. And I credit much of that to the journey of sobriety to help me to really be in gratitude and in the moment where I just wasn't before. So that's a quick synopsis. Yeah. But I'm sure we'll talk more. So that's Beautiful. The gist.
The presenting sponsor of Sober Stories is Lyre's Non-Alcoholic Spirits. With over 17 spirits, 5 premixed cocktails, and 1 spectacular sparkling wine, all without alcohol, Lyre's has become the Sober Stories team's standard for zero-proof drinks that feel festive and celebratory. I've got our community and ops lead, Callie, here today. Callie, I know you're taking a break from alcohol right now.
Oh, yeah, I am. I'll tell you what, I just got to the point where no matter how much I drank, no matter what it was, I would wake up the next day with a headache, and I'm not about that life. I just can't do it anymore. We're too busy.
We are too busy. And I know when you first cut out alcohol, it can feel like there's pretty much just sparkling water to drink. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's like sparkling water or like soda water with bitters.
I would put money on the fact that Lyre's is going to help you recreate all your old standards. Tell me what you're missing.
Ooh, okay. All right. So like summer's coming up, right? I am so ready for that sun, and I am so ready to sit out on the deck, soak in that little vitamin D, and drink a Paloma.
Oh, yes. We have the ruby red grapefruit here, so it like makes your Paloma so much better. But Lyre's got you. Go for the Agave Blanco. It's one of their 2 tequila alternatives.
Oh, that's dope that they have 2 alternatives as well.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
What else?
Oh, like a gin and tonic, when you're just like hitting up a dive bar or something with your buds, being able to just drink a gin and tonic easy. Everyone knows how to make them,
I mean, I can't remember the last time I was in a dive bar, but yeah, sure, we'll go with it.
That's fair. I like pool.
Yeah. Okay. I don't remember the last dive bar I was in, but we've got you covered still. We have 2 different gin alternatives. They have the pink London Spirit or the dry London Spirit. So if you want a little pink gin and tonic, we got you.
Oh, you know that. I love an aesthetic moment.
Aesthetic. Okay. What else?
Oh, you know what? I also have it out here just like I love a mojito as well. Get that like nice herby that like just so mint forward.
Mint forward.
Yeah.
I'm going to put that as my tagline in my bio. Mint forward.
It's just sassy and a little mint forward.
Yeah. But we've got you. Liars has a white cane spirit. It's got this great little monkey on the bottle because all of their bottles have like the animal of the place where they came from.
That's
so
fun.
yeah, they got you. Liars is into recreating and recreating well as many non-alcoholic spirits as possible. So Callie and anyone listening to this, head over to liars.com and use code SoberStories1010. That's the number 10, the word 10 for 10% off your purchase. Liars gives you the freedom to drink your way, to not just provide an alternative to those who don't wish to imbibe alcohol, but to ensure that everyone, like Callie, can enjoy the mirth and the merriment of a soiree or shindig.
I love the gist. I love the high notes for folks who are unfamiliar with you. But since you mentioned it, let's dive in. Tell us about you and alcohol and the journey to become this sober version of who you are now and kind of what that looked like for you.
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, I grew up in Scranton, Pennsylvania. I grew up in the 70s and 80s. And ever since I was little, it was, oh, Eddie's lighting the loafers. He's a fancy fella. He's a fairy. And eventually words like, oh, he's a fag. And some of these words were from my father, my grandfather, on my mom's side, really working to make sure I was a man. So that being said, ever since I can ever remember, I just didn't fit in. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't think I could ever be who I was. I had to always put on a sort of an act, which is no surprise that I gravitated to theater. And I didn't really start drinking early on in high school, or once. I think there was one time we stole a bottle of wine, and there were like 8 of us thought we got drunk. Which is probably not even right. Probably not even possible. And then and of course I got into my early 20s in college, and it really was not until my marriage, and I realized, when I married my high school sweetheart, and I attempted to come out to her a few times, and she said things like, "Oh, you're just European. We'll deal with it." Oh. Well, okay. What does that even mean? Well, we just didn't know what we didn't know, and I stayed in this marriage, and so we both found our way out at one point or another. But the bottom line is, I did find alcohol. I found Tanqueray specifically, and the first DUI I had was on the day that my divorce was mentioned, or put in the newspaper. And again, it was this life of I had to be in the closet, and so I was so ashamed, and it was another a level of exposure. And my father got me out of it. It was U.S. Marshal, and I got some kind of slap on the wrist. And and everyone in the family was like, "Well, of course Eddie drinks a lot. It's because he got a divorce." Fast forward, I come out. My parents said things like, "You're not gay. You're divorced. You just got divorced. You're sad from being divorced." And I was like, "No, I'm gay." So my parents disowned me. I spent this, it was true. It was true. If I was to be myself, I was to be hated. And that was what I was seeing. And so I went and I found Rochester because of my career at the time. And I got into the nightlife. And one thing after another, it was work long days and drink all night, almost 7 days a week. And so this just continued, and it became who I surrounded myself with, how I identified in the LGBTQ plus community. And I even, as I go forward into my drag career, I portrayed a boozy housewife, and her catchphrase was, "There's always time for a cocktail." And it was funny.
I was going to ask about that.
Yeah. And it was funny, and it worked, and it was a part of who I was. And my husband would get upset sometimes, but it just seems like I was able to manage it. I knew since the first sip of alcohol that I was an alcoholic, because it changed. It freed me. It gave me some freedom inside. The anxiety went away. But the fact of the matter was, I was not managing anything. So fast forward to my second DUI. At that point, we had a friend who had been injured. We were doing a fundraiser. I got my second DUI. And of course, who wouldn't drink? Your friend got injured. You were doing a fundraiser. You were doing a wonderful thing for someone. And we brushed it under the rug. Well, I get cast on RuPaul's Drag Race, and superstardom is in my head. I'm going to be a celebrity, right? This is what I've wanted since I was a kid. Well, there I was, sitting at home, and I wasn't getting bookings. This airs on television, and my husband and I made a decision for me to leave my full-time career. I went from a very, very healthy salary and a 401k and all that jazz to $0 coming in. What did I do to myself, to my family? Again, self-doubt, comparison, insecurity, anxiety.
Right.
And I drank, and I drank, and I drank. And the third DUI happened at noon, where I was swerving from children in my neighborhood. Well, my entire life, all I ever wanted was to have a family and kids. And here I'm potentially running over a child.
Yeah.
Dropped to my knees the next day when I was told what I did, because of course I was in a blackout and didn't know it.
Right.
And I just asked for help. I said, "Dear God, I will give up my husband. I will give up my children. I will give up a career. I will give up everything in my life. Please help me." And I went into outpatient and was introduced to AA. And as the minute I went into the rooms, I began to see people and hear my story and see my story. And the light bulb began to go off. And it's been an incredible journey ever since. And when we talk about things like the promises and the joys and the moments of gratitude and the fact that you can sit and just be in the moment and realize that that moment in itself is the gift.
Yes.
I can't ask for anything more. So there is the longer version, but I'm definitely somebody who found my solace alone, drinking and driving. And I know when I play that tape back, I know that what will happen if I have that one drink that you think you can have.
Right.
I know that in fact, at some point it will be more, and I will do it alone, and I will drink and drive. And then we know what will happen next.
You know, I've been taking a ton of notes because there's so many pieces of that really stuck out to me. But the one I underlined was that it was able to be brushed under the rug over and over. And I think that that's a story that's going to really resonate with people, of this idea of, I knew it was a problem, or it was showing up in my life in ways that weren't working for me, but we just brushed it under the rug, or I just brushed it under the rug, or my partner just brushed it under the rug. So what I also hear too is that things have changed for you since then. I mean, if you talk about no bookings and having left your job with the 401k and wondering what happened, tell us about what has happened since you got sober and how that has impacted your career.
Well, first and foremost, the brush it under the rug is a wonderful thing to have taken note from, because if you think about the world we live in, I'd say the entire world, everything is attached to adding alcohol to the celebration.
Yes.
And I didn't know how to not drink. I didn't know that you could have a fun, thriving, fabulous life without alcohol. I didn't know anyone that did. I thought you had to have a prescription to go to AA. I didn't understand. And I was celebrated for being the funny drunk. The one that said the things that everybody else wanted to say, then ended up getting myself in trouble for the snappy mouth, etc. So it often gets brushed under a rug, not just by myself, but by others, because people don't want to look at their own, possibly, or that it's just, oh, well, that was one too many. Well, no, it was probably one bottle too many. Or in my case, sometimes boxed wine. But it didn't matter. All of it was alcohol, and all of it was a problem. But since I began the journey and my arm says grateful. That was the first tattoo I ever got, because when I learned the power of gratitude, I learned how to pray, I learned how to meditate, and I learned how to be in the moment. And I credit not only the program, but I also credit my outpatient, and I credit my dog, who taught me how to be in the moment. You know, pets, nature, these tools help us to realize what is truly meaningful in life. And the more I began to find gratitude in those things, it just seemed that the universe said, that's what we want to give more. So the more I compared in the past when I was drinking and felt anxious and felt less than, the more less than it seemed as though that energy brought me more of that. And so now that I focus on the gratitude, and I focus in on being productive, and I focus in on what I can do versus what others are doing,
right,
work has come. And also, the more I tell the truth, the God's honest truth about whatever is happening, more people are recognizing and can sense the truth. You know, I used to teach at telemarketing that if an agent would sit down like this in their chair, or if they weren't in dress code, they'd say, why do I have to be in dress code? Well, because you present yourself and you sound a different way. And why am I not making sales? Well, because you're exaggerating the offer, or you're lying about the offer. And I started to think about that in the idea of my presence on social media and in interviews. If I'm not telling the truth, people can tell. We have that ability to sense that in one another. If nothing else, we might say, this doesn't feel right, and they might swipe on by. But when we tell the truth and when we're completely honest, it resonates, and it gets, in this social media world, it doesn't get more likes, it gets the likes to love you. And when that happens, more opportunities become present, and opportunities like this. I have a tendency to say yes to pretty much as I possibly can. I don't want to say everything, but I try to say yes to as much as possible, because I just don't know who's listening. And as you mentioned earlier, who it may resonate with, to help them, and in turn find ways that could help me. So I have been, every year since putting down the drink, gotten busier and busier and more rewarding work that I didn't even realize I wanted to do. You know, there's a documentary about me called Workhorse Queen, and a lot of this is talked about in that documentary, and it starts on June 1st. It will be streaming on Stars, or appearing on Stars, but it's on iTunes and Prime Video and Vudu. But that opened up the idea of telling the truth. And then the director had me look at the fact, stop looking to go on this tour or to perform with these other performers that you're comparing yourself with. You are doing a drag story hour for children in your community, where hundreds of people, parents and children, all come together, and we read a book and we talk about positivity and kindness and gratitude and working hard. And so she was saying, focus where your feet are. And again, that ties back to so much of my recovery journey, where I was looking outward, but it was right here. Yes. And we're negotiating with PBS right now to bring this 4 episodes that we've produced of a children's television show to PBS. So again, it was right at my fingertips, right at my feet, but I was finding this, looking elsewhere and comparing, and instead of being grateful and realizing that it was right around me.
I'm glad you brought up the children's story hour, because I was going to ask you about that. I think that is such a beautiful offering, and especially as we think about how disconnected we all came during the pandemic, and this offering of telling these stories, of reading these books aloud. But one of the things that I heard you say is this idea of this kind of cyclical nature of where your energy is and where your focus is. So if you have this negative thought pattern, if you have these comparisons, you have this jealousy, or even with drinking, if you have these thoughts about yourself when you're drinking, then that kind of spirals into this vicious cycle. But the same is true for the opposite. When we step into a different mindset, step into this present moment thinking, or this gratitude, it's also cyclical. It also propels itself forward. So what has been let me back up. If you could summarize the change that you've experienced in who you were when you were drinking versus who you are now, what would you say the biggest takeaway has been?
Well, I think that I refilled my toolbox. I always felt, as somebody who was productive, I had a toolbox, and that toolbox included alcohol, right? It was obvious. It was alcohol, whether it was celebrating or it was a scary time, an anxious time, a stressful time. The solution was alcohol. And also jogging or working out. But it was never prayer or meditation. Very rarely. I had a good upbringing in that respect, but it just really was just, I assumed that my higher power, God, would always be there. I didn't realize I needed to foster that relationship, or needed to just participate in that relationship. I just figured, yeah, I know who God is, or I know who my higher power is, and I'm very spiritual. I get it. But I started to look at what I had been learning with regard to the toolbox. And I think in early sobriety, there's so many things thrown at you, and just the idea of just stopping is hard enough. And when people start talking about the toolbox, it was overwhelming because I just didn't necessarily understand. But gratitude hit me first, and I began journaling like crazy and just writing down. The minute I started to feel off, I would write a gratitude list. But then I began to understand that to share how you're feeling, to specifically speak with another alcoholic or addict. And then I began to realize the power of meetings, and that we are all connected. You mentioned how story time is needed because during the pandemic, it was a way to connect. And people are, even though we have so much technology, people are begging for that connection one way or another. And we think that we're so separate with maybe thoughts, ideas, or politics, or et cetera, et cetera. But truly, we are always connected. And I have learned that I need to foster that connection. I need to participate in that connection. And these tools include, back to the exercise, but getting out into nature and just breathing the fresh air and putting down your technology for certain periods of time. So finding those tools was life-saving. And that tool, one of my favorite tools, I joke when I'm in meetings, is the Serenity Prayer, because my go-to was not just alcohol. My go-to was just a half a Xanax, because that would just take that edge off that anxiety that I suffered from. So those were my tools, alcohol and Xanax. Well, guess who can't keep track once you start having too much? Any of us. And so you don't realize how many halves, et cetera. And so it would take my anxiety away. Yeah. And I'd pass out. But now the Serenity Prayer, being a theater person, I can scream it. I can say it out loud. I can write it down. I can say it in funny ways to make myself laugh. It'll go away again. This too shall pass. So that anxiety will work just the same. Yeah. But as we learn, just not as fast. Sometimes, most times, things don't happen as quickly as we would like, but it will pass. And that is what I had learned, is that tool. And it's funny and it's frustrating, and I'll talk to myself through it, as I'm saying it, but it has worked for me. And you can find any mantra, no matter what whatever works for you. But a mantra like that is a self-soothing thing that isn't, a chemical or other substances that we put into our body that we feel as though we need. And yeah, they worked until they didn't.
Yeah. I like this idea of taking something like the Serenity Prayer and using it differently. This idea of sometimes you want to scream it, and sometimes you want to say it in a British accent, and sometimes you want to say it in a serious tone, and using that to reflect your mood. But what you said about it doesn't work as fast is so key. I think that that's the really big thing that people miss when they first quit drinking, is like they want everything to work as fast as alcohol, and it's just not going to. And like on a chemistry level, on like a physiological level, we know that it's just not going to work that fast. But we make the active choice to use something else, to use other tools. Talk to me about one of the things I wrote down before this interview was I was watching an interview with Mrs. Kasha Davis and Trixie Mattel, who I actually saw at ACL last year. Wonderful show. But you made the joke. I realized I was allergic to alcohol every time I broke out in handcuffs, or every time I drank, I broke out in handcuffs. And I know that this idea of alcohol and drinking was wrapped up in the identity of Mrs. Kasha Davis for a while. Your one woman show was called There's Always Time for a Cocktail. What has the evolution of Mrs. Kasha Davis's identity been in your own personal experience of sobriety?
To this day, I get asked on our Cameo platform, where we make videos for people, personalized videos, to say there's always time for a cocktail, because it's a fun statement. And then I also get messages on Instagram where everybody shows me what they're drinking. So, you know, I got my seltzer.
Oh my
but
gosh.
they'll be, you know, and they'll send it to me. There's always time for a cocktail. And I said it and I celebrated it, and I was playing the part of the boozy housewife. And people would ask me, so now what are you going to say? Sarcastically, they would ask, what are you going to say now? There's always time for a mocktail? No, there's always time for kindness. You know, I am going to continue to say that phrase for people, but not for myself. I don't need to, I'm not in a situation where I have, as I said earlier, I would have been willing to leave performing totally and not perform in certain venues with alcohol. But I realized, you know, quickly that somehow I didn't look at it anymore. And if I just didn't look at it, when I walked into a club, the bar would light up when I was drinking. It would sparkle. It would call me over. And I don't know where it is now. I don't think of it. I'm there to perform. I'm there to communicate a story. I'm there hopefully to help people see the possibility that they have in their life if they happen to be struggling with something or know others that are struggling, and ways that we can help one another. So I find that Mrs. Kasha Davis has become more, she was always a housewife, but she's more motherly now. And she's just, as I mentioned earlier, she's open, she's honest, she tells the truth. She used to have a lot of time for a cocktail, but now she realized that's no longer the case. And she's willing to talk about it, but she's also, and she's willing to joke about it. And those jokes and those conversations, I've had more people after a show, they could have been drinking during the show. They may quietly come up and tell me how much time they have on their sober journey, but others who said that I've inspired them to consider stopping or to consider making some changes, if nothing else. So again, back to the honesty, I think if I were to try to tell people what to do, well, that would be foolish, because no one ever told me I would never listen to anybody that ever told me what to do. Right. But I can always be there to help if anyone asks, and I can just share my truth.
Well, and it's so relatable. It's so, like you said, the honesty piece. It's something that somebody else can see themselves in. And that's really what we're doing here is sharing stories that somebody else can see themselves in. I also hear you say that the alcohol used to be the joy piece, but now when you walk into a club, it's the performance. Am I on?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. When I first started performing, you know, I went to school for theater, and I was told I couldn't make a career in theater, specifically by my father. He said, you have to have a backup plan. It's not a very unrealistic thing to say to your child, but I just heard you can't. I didn't necessarily realize that was good preparation to say that, you know, you're probably going to have to do something else too. At any rate, I went into this career of the call center work, and I did find joy in it. Again, it was a way to help people. Many people that applied at the call center didn't have an education, didn't have a work history, and we were able to give them something to take and build a resume to go further. So that felt great. You know, I didn't really, and it was a very respectable call center in terms of what we were selling. It was very ethical. Call center work can be all over the board. Right. That being said, I wasn't able to perform, and I was dying inside. I knew ever since I was little, I was meant to be on a stage. I knew what it did for my soul, and I was denying it. And so the alcohol at one point was a way to calm that anxiety down. But then I found the drag performances, which at the time were before Drag Race, RuPaul's Drag Race, it was all in a nightclub, all starting at midnight. Right. Well, it's all about drinking and drugs at that point. Okay. So I would go and get either work for tips and drinks, or I'd get a low pay and tips and drinks. Well, I already had money. I didn't need to worry about, I had a career, and my husband had a career. So it was extra fun money to put back into drag, and I got all the free drinks. And so I was doing it for the drinks. And I'm driving home drunk every night, or at least tipsy. What am I doing? And so even at one point, my husband had said, like, we have jobs, like, I can't do this. Well, I was able to go in at 11. I did 11 to 7. You know, I was the director. I could change my schedule. It was constant hangovers every day. And so I didn't drink at work the majority of my career. It was towards the end when I was doing both drag after RuPaul's Drag Race and this call center work. And my call center team, the employers were saying, you're going to have to not go on that cruise. You're going to have to not go on that tour. And I was struggling, like, how do I leave this job?
Right.
And I did it with the support of my husband. But that being said, I started to realize, well, what am I? Who am I? Who's Mrs. Kasha Davis without the alcohol? And then I began to realize I'm so much more. I can go on stage and I can remember what I'm doing. I can go on stage, and if I make a mistake, which we all do all the time, doing everything, I don't have to beat myself up if I missed a line or missed a lyric or didn't know the next performer's name, or, you know, I was telling my life story prior to getting sober and I was forgetting my life story. How is that happening? And I mean, this is, of course, I wasn't having any memory issues, the medical memory issues. It was abuse of alcohol. And so I was having these blank spots on stage, which would cause panic. And so I began to remember more of my own story. And I was able to look at my story in different ways. I was able to laugh at myself. I was able to celebrate. I was able to cry on stage. And all of these things that were opened up because I removed the alcohol. I thought I needed it to tell the story or to even get in drag. And it was so wrong.
Well, I think that our creativity opens up too when alcohol is removed. We think that there's this idea of like the tortured artist, and they always have drinking problems and drug problems. And there's this idea in the arts as a whole that like you'll be better, more creative, more productive, have better outcome if you're drinking. But I find every time I hear these people tell these stories, and everything expands when the alcohol is removed. It's like we've opened up this new part of our brain.
There's a connection. Again, back to my spirituality. I don't hear voices. I feel there's an intuitive feeling of, if I'm writing lyrics for a song, if I'm writing in terms of a show, if I'm on stage and I can't think of what next to say, if I stay calm, the next right thing comes. And the more I trust it, the stronger it will come. So I have written children's books after doing so many story times, but in learning what works in the books and how to do this. But again, that's the work. But then when I sit quiet and in a meditative type state, this idea comes and I trust it and I follow it. And if I follow it and I write it down, inevitably it's right. And here's the thing: when I go and work with the lyricist or my accompanist, they'll think, well, have you thought of this? And I'm not so defensive now that I'm like, you know what? You're right. I'm open to other people's ideas again, where I wasn't when I was drinking. I'd be like, no, I wrote this and it must be this way. Okay, ego. I'm open to other people's suggestions and ideas, and I'm able to say, you know what? I'm wrong, or you may be right. And then all of a sudden something better happens, and I'm able to say thank you to a team of people instead of trying to take all the credit myself. So again, all of these things are things I knew, but that anxiety and that alcohol put me on such a defense, even if I didn't think I was showing that defense, that I was definitely not as creative.
And I feel like there's this closed nature versus the open nature that I hear you talking about: open, honest, creative, productive, like having this outflow of energy on stage. I think that so many people are afraid that when they quit drinking, it'll all be over, that it'll all end, their life will end. And then on the other side of it, there's just so much expansion. One of the things that I wanted to ask your thoughts on today, and as we are stepping into Pride Month and your documentary on June 1st, which I wrote down because I will be catching that. Can you talk to us more about how your experience, and then also how you see alcohol impacting the queer community at large? What are your thoughts on that?
I mentioned earlier that I was disowned, and I'm it's mentioned in Workhorse Queen. I came out to my parents, and my mother's response was dramatic. And part of it was she was trying to make me laugh, but the other parts, it was tears and yelling, and I'll never accept this. And my father's response was to get close to my face, in my eyes, and spit in my face and told me to get out of the house. Now, this man knew first. Since I was a child, all he ever did was try to make me more masculine, more the man that was sharing his name, and would tease me, and say that I was acting like a fairy, him and my grandfather on my mom's side. But so I was like, seriously? Like, I understand now that the effort was there to keep me safe, because in that time there was not a lot of acceptance. Let's face the facts. I grew up in the 80s. We had the AIDS epidemic. People of ignorance thought gay meant die. Right. That was all there was. And it was because of the fact that many gay men were dying. Right. So, of course, my parents were afraid that was going to happen. And without, really educating themselves, that's what they believed. I mean, I literally remember my mother saying one time, I don't want you to go to the gym because you might get AIDS from the treadmill. What? That's ridiculous. And I, of course I knew enough to say that, but ugh. So God rest both of their souls. I know that they tried to keep me safe, but this is not an uncommon theme. The LGBTQ community constantly has to fight to just be. Some people will think, oh, we need to have straight pride, or we need to have everyone should celebrate. Yes, but you feel a level of hate. You feel you can't ever be yourself. There's a high level of anxiety. It's difficult to find your tribe, and if you do, you're most likely going to be bullied starting in school, which is why I am so passionate about giving something to parents and their youth early on to show that you are you, and that is wonderful. It should be celebrated. And that if you don't identify as queer or gay, that if you happen to see somebody different in any way, shape, or form, our intuition, our next step should be to treat them with kindness, because people are struggling with many different things. So unfortunately, the LGBTQ community celebrates alcohol because the place that we would go would be the nightclub. That was originally where I found my family. It was where I found my tribe. And so there aren't enough. There are more now. There are more places now. There's much more visibility. And every step of the way, more is being talked about. But I will still say, no matter how much is on television, how many books are written, how many Instagram posts about celebrate and be yourself, you still have to come out to your closest loved ones and be honest with them. And that could be very scary. And so people turn to drugs and alcohol, and I don't necessarily think that I don't know whether things like that will get better, but things like this conversation, this podcast that you're doing, Sober Stories, sharing a solution will give anyone, no matter how they identify, some light at the end of the tunnel. Because as I mentioned earlier, I thought I needed I needed to get to the doctor and find out how I got this help with a slip. I didn't know that it was readily available everywhere. And so
needed a referral to the rooms, right?
I needed a referral. I mean, I know that some people get to the rooms that way, but it just wasn't working. It wasn't happening for me. So, so I am grateful to have the opportunity to be a guest on a podcast like this, and to be as open and honest in my journey with regard to the documentary, I'm not ashamed to ever talk about any of the things that I've gone through, because there's a hope that it will help somebody else.
Yes.
I am definitely breaking my own anonymity, but it's I believe that it helps.
It helps. Yeah. The storytelling is so powerful. So tell me about Pride Month, this idea of visibility, this idea of celebration, this idea of connection and community, and being in this space. And as you said earlier about alcohol, not being anonymous, and we can kind of bridge the gap between those two. What are you doing to celebrate this year? How are you celebrating Pride and doing so without alcohol?
Well, I am excited to say that when I'm asked to do Pride celebrations, I'm often asked to do the family day, the story hour, the earlier show. I think in the character that I portray on stage, that's often the go-to, and I'm so thrilled to do that. And what I have noticed when I do story time is that some parents have come up to me, and the ones I'm, to be honest with you, most impressed with are the dads who say, "Thank you for showing me that there's a happy, healthy life beyond what I've seen." The Pride celebrations do indeed have a focus around, a festival and alcohol, and that is not unlike Christmas, St. Patrick's Day, and anything else that we celebrate. What we know is that alcohol somehow, some way, has been attached to pretty much every celebration. So if we can be a sober story, if nothing else, a sober presence, I don't necessarily have to do you can do this today without alcohol versus just doing the event without alcohol. Being that example, people will notice, just like when they noticed when I used to think they didn't think I was an alcoholic. Duh. I was obviously an alcoholic. I can get not only my drinking and driving, but we can talk about a bazillion things that I did that I shouldn't have been doing, and so the finger was pointed then. So people will take note. Wow, Mrs. Kasha Davis was here all day, and she was hosting the Pride event, and she's sober. She hasn't had one drink, or she's on time. She's doing a great job. She's interacting with, and those are my goals when I do attend these, is to make sure that, I'm as professional as possible and interactive and grateful. And so those things get remembered. I was working on a project, a very, very big project. I'll leave it all nameless, but the bottom line is, it was a big project. It was a big streaming network, and my cohorts at 11 a.m. were all other fellow performers, and they were drinking and drinking and drinking throughout the whole thing, which I thought to myself, well, this is interesting. It's not even hard. We're just sitting here. And the handler and the photographer all thanked me for not drinking. And they don't know whether they know or not that I'm sober. They just noticed that I wasn't acting like a fool,
right?
Just because I have a name, or I have a following, that I thought they can act this way or do this. And that to me is a wonderful example of, well, that they may ask me back for more work, simply for that reason, So I don't know anything about these individuals, whether they're sober or not, but they noticed. So to me, I think it's that example, whether it's at the Pride festivals, that I will be the best that I can be in my sobriety, as well as just continuing to make that presence on social media as well.
Well, it's just modeling. It's saying, look, you can have this glamour, and you can have this success, and you can have this. I don't know if you're doing a float or a stage or wherever you will be for Pride, but say, I'm doing this without alcohol. And whether or not someone takes that invitation, whether or not somebody else sees that and can see themselves in it, it's modeling. And I can't even tell you how many people I've had over the years who have come up to me and said, hey, I saw the thing you posted on Instagram and now I don't drink anymore. And it's like never in a million years would I have imagined that this person would see a random post on Instagram and then decide to change their relationship with alcohol. And many probably won't, but just even this idea of giving back in this way just by modeling and opening up possibility for somebody else.
Right. The fact that it's possible, the fact that we can stumble, we can make mistakes in our journey, whether it's through our words or actions, or even in a relapse for individuals. I mean, just being open, sharing those types of things, and sharing it publicly is not for everyone.
Right.
Just happens to work for me because I pretty much share everything about
like you said, though,
my life and my story.
It's that truth and that honesty, right? And there's a lot of freedom in that.
There is. And, I remember, unfortunately, when my mom was passing and struggling prior to her passing with some medical stuff, she had this dramatic situation and she held my hand and she said, what did I do with my life? And at the time I had still been drinking, and I went into a major panic over that time. And I used to have anxiety about death. And I used to think to myself, what am I doing with my life? I'm still at this call center job. I'm drinking, I'm hiding it. I'm constantly struggling. And that whole thought process of, I may not be drunk all the time, but I'm thinking about my next drunk. I'm hungover. Yeah. I'm actively thinking about, how I can hide my drinking. It was such a demon. It was constantly taking over everything. And I used to have these panic attacks about, if I were to die today, what am I leaving behind? Yes, I know that there are people that love me and that I've made contributions in my family's lives, but what is it? And now I know that if it were to happen, I can say, he shared his truth, and I get a little teary-eyed thinking about the people that will share with me how that truth has helped them. And there's no better payment or reward in this life. It doesn't come in the form of a monetary. They don't send me a check.
Right.
It's just the fact that I can be there for someone in a way that I didn't feel what was there for me. Whether it's with the children's stories, but also with this, telling the truth about my sober journey.
The word I've heard throughout this conversation is kindness, and the gift of giving kindness, whether or not it's on purpose or not. Just this idea of being kind, of showing kindness, of teaching children, of teaching others to be kind. That's like, I get kind of a little bit like, got the little prickles on my face thinking about like, what do we leave behind? But we leave behind kindness.
Yeah.
So the last question I ask every interview, and I'll let you answer this as Ed or as Mrs. Kasha Davis. If your story, the story of you and alcohol, were to be written, and not in a kid's book, but if your story were to be written, what would it be titled and what kind of book would it be?
Well, there's always time for a cocktail until there isn't.
There's always time for a cocktail until there isn't. Beautiful.
I mean, that's
perfect.
It. Because the phrase, first of all, the phrase is loved, and until there isn't. And let's talk about the both. But I don't know. That's what first came to my mind. And it's so funny. Yeah. When you think about answer as Ed or answer as Mrs. Kasha Davis, I've realized more and more that Ed is always present. It just so happens that when I'm dressed as Mrs. Kasha Davis, it's like Ed with an exclamation point. It's really like a little bit more exaggerated, but it's me, and it's a part of me that I'm so grateful. When I think about the sobriety journey, I've realized, there was a part at one point where I thought, am I trans? If I'm professionally dressing as this female character, And I am not. I identify as Ed, he,
Mm-hmm.
him. And when I'm dressed as Mrs. Kasha Davis, I'm she, her. But
Mm-hmm.
I started to think to myself, this is loving that little boy who happened to be a little bit more feminine, who happened to be a little bit more flamboyant. And Mrs. Kasha Davis is a celebration of all that is me.
Little love note to the younger version of yourself.
Yes.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time, for your storytelling. I know that those who are not familiar with you and have not watched Drag Race are going to want to find you, connect with you, learn more about your story. So it sounds like you have your Workhorse Queen documentary coming out. Is it June 1st?
It's June 1st on Stars, but you can also find it on Prime Video, iTunes, Google Play, and Vudu.
Beautiful. And tell us about your children's books.
So I've got 3 children's books that I've written, and the latest one is Has Anyone Said I Love You? And it is a story about loving yourself. And in the end, it talks about something that my mother taught me at a very young age. She would say, after you brush your teeth, you look into your own beautiful eyes and say, I love you, because when you love yourself, everything is possible. And it really works with Sober Stories. It works with following your dreams, and Workhorse Queen is about that as well. It's realizing that exactly who you are is who you're meant to be, and who is meant to be celebrated, and that you're never too old to dream.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for your time and for sharing your story. If folks want to follow you on social media, how do they connect with you?
Mrs. Kasha Davis. I think I'm the only one out there, but as far as I know, so you can find me on Instagram and TikTok and Twitter and
TikTok.
Facebook and all that. Yeah. Well, Mr. Davis handles the TikTok because that that was one too many for me. And I said, you know what? You're better at this. And sometimes he has me do things on there that I'm like, oh, goodness.
Takes a village, right?
Exactly.
All right, Ed. Well, thank you so much for your time today and for giving us your story.
Thank you.